Welcome. I'm Peter Klein, Director and Associate Professor at the Graduate School of Journalism here at UBC. Welcome to the President's 4th Annual Town Hall, which is part of UBC's report to the community. The Town Hall focuses on UBC's internal community, faculty, staff, and students. There's also an online annual report released in July. This year, the format's similar to last year. The President will make brief remarks, and then he and I will have a conversation, and then there'll be an opportunity for all of you to ask some questions. CITR Campus Radio is broadcasting live and streaming online at citr.ca, and we'll have a podcast available after the event. But first, your student board member, Mike Silly, brings welcome remarks. Is Mike here? Oh, please. Change in plan.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sumita Sharma, and I'm the UBC Vancouver student rep on the Board of Governors. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today, not only to the Town Hall meeting this afternoon, but also to the new academic year, which just promises to be exciting and stimulating here in this place of mind, UBC. Education. Excellent post-secondary education requires investment, not only by the government, but increasingly by the private sector, and also by the students, and quite frankly, often by our parents as well. The UBC's Board of Governors is responsible, among many other things, for the management of the university's business affairs. The board is entrusted with the responsibility to ensure that the funds entrusted to the university are spent judiciously and invested, keeping the long-term health of the university in mind. This prudent stewardship is especially important in times when uncertainty and unpredictability color the global economic landscape. I'm happy to add that the Board of Governors has had an excellent year so far, working closely with Professor Toop and his senior administration to help meet the many challenges that are facing us today. Our deliberations have one clear goal: to serve the university to the best of our ability. All the members bring to the board table the views of the different constituencies, students, faculty, staff, external. There are no advocates for any one interest group. The decisions are made in the long-term health and overall best interests of the university, and in support of UBC's mission to make it a world-renowned institution of higher learning and research, a mission that I think we are well on our way to achieving. Once again, on behalf of the UBC Board of Governors, I thank you all for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumita Sharma, student representative. And now I'll pass it over to President Toop.
Thanks, Peter. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to see that even for town halls, it's just like one's in class and everyone's sitting at the back of the classroom. It's very nice. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of members of our Board of Governors and thank them for their outstanding service. And all of the members of the senior leadership team from UBC are also here, and I want to thank them as well for all of the very hard work that they do on our behalf. I want to remind us that everything we're doing at the university now, from my perspective, is focused around trying to make sure that we uphold the commitments we've made to ourselves and the wider communities we serve through Place and Promise, the UBC plan. You will remember that the plan has now been in operation for a few years, launched in December of 2009. But I want to emphasize that this year the plan was updated through a very wide consultation process, and it now includes portfolio actions underway to support the goals of the plan. So it is very much a living and changing document, although the core themes remain the same, and it can be, of course, found on the university website. There were, you'll remember, 3 fundamental commitments, and that makes perfect sense because they are the commitments of a great public university. Of course, to enhanced student learning, to research excellence, and to even better and stronger community engagement, supported by 6 areas of emphasis that really highlighted the special place and role that UBC has because of who we are and where we are. The plan is critical, I think, to UBC's success because it actually drives coordinated action across the university. I see the plan as giving us perhaps a rallying point, a focus for effort, while acknowledging that there are, of course, activities spread across the many initiatives included within the plan. Our budget now links fully to Place and Promise, and thanks to the very hard work of our deans and other leaders across the university working with the vice presidents, we, I think, are making progress in a way that I would venture to say no other university in Canada is able to achieve because of that focus, because of that hard work, and because of the talent of the leadership and all of the wonderful contributions made by student, staff, and faculty across the university. The third annual report was released in July 2012, and it's available on the Strategic Plan website. It reports on the plan's progress and tells lots of stories related to our commitments. There's a lot of detail there, and I encourage you to look at that plan. We're planning to change this website and the reporting structure over the course of the next year so that we have in the future a fully interactive website that will be updated on a regular basis, reporting on the plan's successes and places where we need to make more effort. And in saying that, I want to emphasize that we're working now on trying to establish clear metrics to measure our success and challenges within the plan. We're developing key indicators for each section of the plan, and we'll be reporting on them beginning next year. Now, I want to be clear, I don't actually have a fetish for measurement, and I don't think universities should have a fetish for measurement. But I do think that we should discipline ourselves and ask ourselves whether we are really making the progress that we say we want to make. Are we actually living up to the commitments we've made? That's the point of trying to establish metrics and reporting on them. I'm just going to highlight a few of this year's initiatives and some of the problems and challenges we face over the course of the next while. In relation to student learning, it's obvious that things are actually going quite well at UBC. With an 89% entering average, it's fair to say that UBC attracts among the brightest students of any university in the world. But to get the most out of the university, students have to be able to be much better than mere test takers. So a whole series of initiatives has been undertaken and launched in the last year. Broad-based admissions across the entire undergraduate first-degree programs, enrollment services advisors assigned to each of our incoming students to stay with them throughout their time at UBC, new centers clustering housing and academic programs being brought together, enriched learning experiences being investigated and committed to across the campus, increased informal learning spaces being developed, collegia being created, programs that support student well-being, especially mental health and well-being, launched over the course of the last year. I hope that all of these will help our students focus in a new way on what it is to be a successful student and a good citizen, helping them to refine their studies, to gain access to kind of life experiences that really transform their opportunities for the future. This year, we need to focus more on graduate students. Over the last few years, there's been a very strong emphasis upon undergraduate improvements, and we know that graduate studies often brings with it very particular sets of problems, frustrations, and anxieties. And we know that that now has to be a major focus of our endeavors. The provost and I have committed to each other that we will keep working on this during the course of the year, and you will be hearing about major initiatives over the next few months. A review of athletics and recreation was undertaken, and recommendations from that review are being implemented now. 2 task groups have been set up, one to focus on varsity and high-performance athletics, and the other to look at health and wellness recreation for all of our students. There are internal and external representatives on both of those groups, and I would encourage you to look at the VP Students website for more information. In my view, this is an important initiative because I think it can help place UBC at the forefront of health and wellness for all students. I mentioned the commons that are being created. The first one on the Ponderosa site will add 1,100 new beds to the supply for UBC students, and will also connect the Faculty of Arts programming, especially in the visual arts, and the Faculty of Education to this housing opportunity. So we further integrate housing and academic life. I just want to remember one very important moment that the university experienced in this last year, and that was the special congregation ceremony that was held to honor Japanese Canadian students whose university experience was disrupted in 1942 when they were uprooted and internally exiled within Canada, a violation of their human and citizenship rights. That ceremony, for those of you who weren't there, was for me a very moving moment in reconciliation and in showing that the university, even if it takes some time, does try to do the right thing. UBC students hosted the 2012 Harvard Model UN in Vancouver in March. 2,100 students from 65 countries representing 203 universities. It was one of the most energized and exciting events that I attended all year, and it was organized by our wonderful students. In terms of research excellence, UBC continues to attract outstanding research support, receiving more than $511 million in external research funding for over 7,900 projects. There were 6 new Canada Research Chairs, 11 renewals, but I do have to say that there is significant concern around the erosion of support to the core granting programs of the federal granting councils. And I do want to assure you that UBC is taking a leading role in advocating federally on behalf of the granting councils and the importance of those core funding programs. Now, behind all those numbers are real people, of course, people across the university doing absolutely fabulous work. People like Anush Purtarsip, who developed the Composite Research Network to connect Western Canadian academic researchers who are working with composite materials and businesses that are interested in their work. Dr. Peter Cullis won the Prix Galien Canada 2011 Research Award in Pharmaceutical Research and Innovation. We have now 18 new doctoral students awarded Canada Vanier scholarships, $50,000 a year for up to 3 years in support of their graduate studies. In addition, we launched the Peter Wall Solutions Initiative, providing a total of $865,000 in new funding for 12 collaborative research projects involving UBC faculty members and partner community groups. Projects address a range of issues from palliative care in rural settings to housing justice and drinking water quality in First Nations communities. That's a natural lead-in to community engagement. A whole series of public deliberative dialogues were hosted by UBC. My favorite title was Cute Cats, Arab Spring, and Social Media, which was a very important and interesting social media talk on transparency and instantaneous dissemination of information by Ethan Zuckerman, an MIT media research scientist. In addition, Dr. Paul Kershaw of UBC's HELP program had a Canada-wide speaking tour in partnership with the YWCA and UBC, asking the question, does Canada work for all generations? Community service learning, community-based research provided opportunities for students to work in communities here in Canada and around the world, ranging from the judicial externships, working with nonprofit groups. Specific projects included Sauder's marketing application course, helping Klitsa Tutoring expand their after-school program for children and youth, a partnership with the African Institute for Mathematical Scientists supports African students, and provides an opportunity for UBC graduate students to visit African math sites and to work as short-term course instructors. Researchers were working with communities around the world to change practices. Dr. Karen Humphreys, working with the Heart and Stroke Foundation, focusing on gender-based differences in cardiovascular disease. Dr. Karen Gardner, developing a specialized website to allow dentistry students to connect and collaborate with peers across 3 continents, and winning the first U21 award for internationalization. Well, I'm not going to go on much further. I could talk about each of the subsets, the 6 other commitments that we make, but I'll encourage you to instead go to the website and look at the annual report. I am going to say, however, that it was a remarkably successful year for the alumni and fundraising campaign for UBC. We've reached more than 70% of our goal for alumni engagement already, with years to go in the campaign, and we've reached 64% of the fundraising goal. $962 million new money donated to UBC to support activities across the university, research, student scholarships, community engagement projects. Really a remarkable achievement. Finally, I want to emphasize that in 2012-13, the budget of the university was structurally balanced without any cut to faculties on either campus. I do think that that's quite a remarkable achievement and results from hard work from people across the university in a time of continued volatility in the global economy. There will be more financial pressure on the university, as there will be on nations, provinces, and cities. We know, if we look around the world, that the global economic situation has not improved dramatically. We're still somewhat wobbly, and the university is not exempted from that. But I have enormous confidence that with the very good work that's been done to position UBC as strongly as we're now positioned, that we can look forward to the next year with real excitement and confidence. Thank you very much, and it's time for questions.
Thank you, President Toup. You ended on money, and as Deep Throat said, follow the money, so let's just jump right to there. You walk around campus, you see a lot of construction going on, and yet post-secondary education was the only government portfolio that didn't receive additional funding this year. As you pointed out, there were no cuts this year. Should we expect cuts in the future? Do we expect a balanced budget in the future?
We expect a balanced budget because most of you will probably know that under provincial legislation we're required to have a balanced budget at a consolidated level, and that will continue to be the case. As I suggested, I think there will be increasing pressure. We already know that the current government has planned for a 1% cut for the entire sector in next year's budget, in its projections, and the year after a 2% cut. Now, I can assure you that we're not just sitting back and saying, oh, okay. Instead, we're talking very actively with government, and of course in a pre-election period, there are conversations happening with the official opposition as well, trying to position what we're cleverly calling reinvestment in the post-secondary sector. So we will keep working hard on that track as a matter of public policy advocacy. In terms of the construction, I do want to make a couple of short points. One, it's really important to understand that a lot of the money that you're seeing spent now was committed years ago. So it's not that this is new money and doesn't make sense in relation to the notion of no increase. So this was money committed in budgets 2, 3, and 4 years ago. The other point I would like to make is, and it's a really hard one for a lot of people to get their head around, and I understand that, there's a very fundamental difference between the operating budget for the university and capital budget for the university. We have to keep our capital spending and our operating spending as separate as we possibly can. There's a tiny bit of overlap sometimes when we want to support really crucial academic projects, and we use a very small amount of operating funding to do that. But typically we will rely entirely on special project funding from government or from private donations in order to meet our capital project needs. The government has actually cut all of the expenditure for routine maintenance over the past couple of years, and that's proving to be a real challenge because we've got to find new money within the university budget to try and make sure that buildings are maintained properly. But new funding always comes separately from operating, and that's why you still see some of these capital projects that are being built at a time of otherwise fairly significant financial pressure.
You mentioned that there's been some building to expand housing. A number of questions were submitted in advance of Town Hall, and some of them address housing. This is certainly an issue that's of relevance to really the whole range of people here. Some students, grad students and other students have expressed concern that housing, particularly for families, is difficult to find. Vancouver still remains the most expensive city in the country, and by some measures the most expensive city in North America. What is being done to address the housing issue? Is it an issue in terms of recruiting students and faculty?
Yes, and those of you who were here last year will remember that I said that housing was, for me, probably the single greatest issue in terms of recruitment and retention of great faculty, staff, and indeed students. On the graduate family front, I am delighted to say that we're actually expanding right now the number of units available for graduate students with families. We're almost doubling that as we speak, and that will be something that we continue to work on, because we know that one of the things that's so important for students is having a variety of housing options. A couple of years ago, our Board of Governors made a brilliant decision, in my view, to target some of the money that was being produced by development on the South Campus and to create the Student Housing Endowment Fund. So we now have access to money specifically targeted to support the growth in student housing. I mentioned the Ponderosa Commons project, 1,100 new beds, which will come online in the next year and a half. Beyond that, a projection to try to create another 1,400 or so beds by 2015. So we're really working hard on the student housing front, while already having the largest housing stock of any university in Canada, 9,100 units currently, by far the largest. So on the student front, it's a combination of building more and building more variety. Family housing, graduate housing, new housing that's going to be built in the Gage South neighborhood as a result of decisions taken this year will be targeted for students because it remains in the academic core, as many of you will know, and it's going to be primarily for graduate students. We're also trying to create more small options, two-person suites rather than four-person suites, etc. Lots of options. For faculty and staff, and I'll try and be quick, I want to say thank you to my colleague on the Board of Governors, Nassif Gussoub, Professor of Mathematics, who's led the charge on a housing task force over the course of the last 18 months. That task force is going to be reporting to the next meeting of the Board of Governors, which is in a couple of weeks, with a series of recommendations that really go, in my view, some way to address the challenge faced by faculty and staff for housing. In that report, we're going to see a recommendation to the Board of Governors that we substantially increase the amount of rental housing on campus to about 30% of all units. Also, that 2/3 of those units should be available at a lower sub-market rate only for faculty and staff. We're also seeing a recommendation that there be a pilot project to create essentially lower income housing on campus for staff whose salaries, family income is lower than $64,000. We're going to begin that process. It's modeled on BC Housing, low-income housing. I'm very excited about that recommendation. And then, in addition, trying to create a model for reduced house cost ownership opportunities for faculty members. And this group traveled across North America to a number of sister institutions to try and see what best practices were in faculty recruitment and retention. And this was one of the models that really was very important. There's lots of detail on that, which you'll be able to see on the website of the Board of Governors, and then there'll be a lot of communications about this new plan. But assuming the board agrees with the recommendations, I think that UBC will have by far the leadership position in Canada on this issue, and frankly, one of the leadership positions in North America.
Great. As a member of the UBC faculty, I know one of the issues that are often raised is that we're not seeing enough women rising through the ranks,
Yes.
receiving tenure and advancing through academic leadership positions. What's being done to attract more women, particularly in fields like engineering?
So I completely agree with the presupposition of the question. I think it's a major issue for all universities, not just UBC. There are some very concrete things that are being done. I want to commend the Faculty of Science for taking leadership here. A couple of years ago, many of you will know, they did a climate survey for really what it felt like to be a faculty member in science, and one of the issues that emerged was this whole question around gender, support for female academics, etc. And there were a number of initiatives that began in science, for example, looking at tenure and promotion systems to see why it was that women associate professors seem to take longer to get to the professorial status. And there's real work that's been done in concrete action and improvement. The provost looked at that and I think saw an opportunity for the entire university. He's done a number of things, David Farrar. He's appointed Rachel Kuski, who was actually involved very much in that climate work in science, as the first advisor on female faculty members in the provost's office. We've conducted a full pay equity review in collaboration with the Faculty Association, and the results of that have now come in, and I can assure you we will be acting on the results of that pay equity review this year. In addition, Rachel, in her job, has been looking at the whole area across the sweep of equity-related programs in the university to figure out how we can do a better job, not only for women, but for all people who come from either traditionally disadvantaged backgrounds or, frankly, even just more diverse backgrounds than was usually the case in universities. And so there's real work being done on that front as well. So I'm actually feeling hopeful, although there's a lot to do. Over the last 3 years, 41% of the academic hires has been made up of women. Over the course of the life of the university, that was in the 30s, mid-30s, over the last 10 to 20 years. So there has been modest improvement. I believe there's more can be done. As many of you will know who've sat on hiring committees, one thing we're doing is ensuring that every hiring committee is actually given some training on questions of equity and diversity before they begin the hiring process. We're trying to do that for all administrative jobs, for decanal jobs, and I would like to see more and more of that happening at the level of faculty recruitment. Obviously, it has to be done sensitively. This is not about telling people who should be hired, but it's really important that we are attuned to the research that shows that there is unconscious bias in hiring. We've got to address that.
I always tell my students not to ask two-part questions because clever interview subjects then just choose the easiest question to answer. But I'm going to ask you a two-parter and trust that
I'll try and do both.
You'll answer both.
I'm not that clever.
Yeah,
so.
well, childcare is an ongoing concern amongst the wide range of people who are here and who are concerned about university issues. Despite the expansion of childcare facilities, there's still, in some cases, a 2-year wait, and that's of concern, I think, to faculty and staff. There's also concern that UBC childcare workers are, in some people's estimations, not paid fairly. So what's being done to address both those issues?
So some of you will have heard me speak about the childcare frustration that I have, which is we operate in an environment where there is no public policy supporting childcare. So you need to understand that UBC already has the largest childcare provision of any post-secondary institution, I would suspect, in the world, except perhaps in China. But certainly in North America, the largest by far. Why is that? Because there is inadequate daycare in British Columbia. It's a fundamental social problem. So I do encourage all of us to keep pushing on that issue. Now, having said that, we decided, and the board decided a few years ago, that we couldn't just say, well, it's not our problem, because it's a major issue, again, for recruitment and retention, and it has implications on the gender questions that you were raising earlier. So a decision was taken to try to find new child care opportunities whenever we were building out in new construction. So you'll see that in a number of the projects that are up and coming, there is childcare, excuse me, I want to talk about healthcare, obviously. That's another area of fundamental public policy challenge. There will be new spaces for kids. There has been improvement for parents who have 3 to 5 year olds. The big challenge is now for younger children. So we're obviously looking to find ways of addressing the balance in the overall childcare provision for the university. We have an ambitious goal to get to 1,000 places over the course of the next couple of years, and we are building out new facilities. In addition, there are about 140 places on campus in not-for-profit private organizations. And so we're also trying to encourage faculty, staff, students to look at opportunities that may be outside the formal UBC system. But we know that this is a real issue, and we continue to keep a focus on it, and we continue to build new spaces.
The other thing
And second issue. Sorry. Workers, yes. Again, this is, for me, a fundamental question of public policy. I think that childcare workers are paid too little everywhere. Teachers are paid too little everywhere. Now, how do we address that? Our challenge is that currently the childcare workers are within the UBC family and therefore are subject to the limitations on any growth in income that are established by PSEC, the provincial authority that gives us our bargaining mandate. So we're actually looking at options to see whether or not there's some way of perhaps structuring ourselves differently that might allow us to be more flexible in the way childcare workers are paid. We're not quite there yet, but we believe that we need to be creative on this one, or we're going to be stuck in the bargaining mandate that really doesn't allow us to do very much for people who are paid very low salaries, taking care of our children.
I want to give opportunity to people to ask some questions, but I want to follow up on a few points that were raised last year. The other thing we tell our students is to follow up on questions, so I'm going to walk the walk here. One of the issues that you addressed last year at the town hall is transportation. UBC puts itself forward as this beacon of sustainability, and yet there are still real challenges, particularly in terms of transportation. Here we are, on the side of the city. What is being done, particularly with respect to lobbying for the Broadway line, which obviously would greatly improve that?
So in 1997, there were roughly 12,000 transit trips to UBC. In 2011, 74,000. So that's a tremendous success story, and as many of you will know, we've been cutting parking, including in front of my building where I currently live, all gone, turned into green space and space to sit and think, which is terrific, especially in this beautiful sun. But we also know that for many students, the U-Pass has become the Pass U for the 99 bus that goes along and leaves you sitting without any option to get to class on time and getting increasingly frustrated. There's a further point that I want to make on this. We're missing economic opportunity by having weak public transit to the university. If you think about UBC's role as an economic driver for the region, in terms of the number of people who live and work here, in terms of the research that's done here that has huge positive spin-offs into the wider community, if you think about the connection between the research done here on campus and what's happening at our sister hospital institutions all along the Broadway corridor and in BC Cancer Agency, etc., that is an enormous engine of economic, social health for the province. And we're missing an opportunity to make that connection work. So what we're doing is working very closely right now with the City of Vancouver. To answer you directly, we've co-commissioned an economic development report study that we hope will show what I've just argued, that we're missing this economic opportunity by having weak transit links, and that's something that has to happen. At the same time, we're making the case that the Broadway corridor has 100,000 trips a day, which makes it one of the busiest transit hubs in all of North America, and certainly the largest in the region. So we can't keep saying, well, it's a small problem compared to others. It's not a small problem, it's a problem right now, and it has social, cultural, and economic impact. And when I say cultural, what I mean is we also have enormous resources out here on campus that could be of service to the whole community. The Chan, the Museum of Anthropology, the Freddie Wood Theatre, etc. And we've got inadequate transit to get people to use those venues. So we're working really closely with the City of Vancouver right now to try to coordinate on an advocacy strategy. We've been talking with ministers in the government in a concerted effort to make sure they're aware of the challenges faced by many people in terms of public transit. And we remain ever optimistic that we can change the dynamic. But yet again, I'm going to say it, transit's an area where there is a public policy vacuum, and we need to have a more strategic approach to public transit in this whole area.
Another contentious issue that was brought up at last year's town hall was the use of animals in research, which I know is an ongoing concern for a number of people in the community here. My understanding is that you've redesigned the website, posted information, and UBC is more forthcoming than most universities in Canada in terms of use of animals in research. But we still see negative stories, we still see pressure being put on the university regarding this issue. What's being done to further this dialogue to address this concern?
So those of you who were here last year will remember that I made a commitment to be more transparent with all of the information that we could provide that was not nominated information about individual researchers in relation to the use of animals in our research, and we have done that. I'd go further than what you said, Peter. I would say that UBC is now the university in Canada providing the greatest information, not one of. It is providing more information than any other university. And we've done that by telling exactly how many animals are used in research, what species are there, and we've tried to give an overview of the investments that we've made over the last 5 years of roughly $100 million in better care for animals on campus. We also recently released a 2010 report from the Canadian Council on Animal Care, to my knowledge the first university to do that, which went through all of the issues that the Canadian Council on Animal Care wanted to raise vis-a-vis care here for animals on the UBC campus. So we really have become much more transparent than we were before. We will continue to do that. We will continue to try to release more information as it becomes available. I did say last year that we have to balance that against the privacy interests and the safety interests of individual researchers. I'm not suggesting that there's been any inappropriate conduct here in BC. There has not. But I mentioned last year that if you look at other parts of the world, in the UK, in California, etc., individuals have been targeted, and we don't want our researchers to face that. So we have to be a little bit careful about how information is released. I want to assure you again that UBC is not really in a different position on animal research, beyond the fact that we're more transparent and have invested more, than any other large research-intensive university. The kind of research that's done here is very similar to that which is done at research-intensive universities the world over. It's dictated by the need primarily for medical researchers to do what's called animal modeling. Interestingly, legislation in Canada, the US, the UK, and elsewhere actually requires animal testing before we can actually go to human tests on drugs and other initiatives that have potentially an important effect on human health and address very debilitating diseases. So we're doing what we're told we have to do in terms of the regulatory framework. Lastly, I just want to emphasize that we do adhere to the highest ethical standards and the 3 R's principle. That means to reduce, refine, and replace the use of animals wherever possible. So when we can do computer modeling, we do. And it's only when computer modeling wouldn't tell us enough that we do the animal research, and we do it to improve human health. And animal welfare, interestingly, because some of this testing is also in relation to improving animal welfare.
Okay,
and we'll continue on that track.
Thanks for addressing that. There were many really good questions submitted. I think my understanding is your office is going to reply to all of those with direct answers if we didn't get to address some of the questions you have. But now we'll open it up to the audience to ask a few questions. We have about 15 minutes. If you could just say your name, please.
My name is Julia Ostertag. I'm a PhD student in the Faculty of Education. And I was very excited to hear you commenting on family housing. But the picture you painted is a bit different than the picture that's evolving there currently. If you think about family housing right now, it's these town houses and beautiful parks and children playing with lots of access to outdoor spaces and a wonderful, wonderful community that really sustains the principle you're talking about, student engagement, student learning, research, community engagement. It's really like a little paradise. I was showing my mom on Skype. I was like, look at their backyard, look at the front yard. There's parks on both sides of our house. Our children play together. It's an international community. It's intercultural engagement, all the things you talk about. But what's happening now is that the entire space has been rezoned. So it's been cut in half, and without due consultation, there are now going to be apartment buildings and market housing going into that area. And all the student housing is going into apartment buildings. And we're a couple of us here today, but we're really worried about this because the dynamic of student housing, that sustainable community that's there currently, will not exist when we live in 12-story apartment buildings crammed together. And it's possible to live well as students in those apartments, but this is a model community. It's very much a Jane Jacobs dream community that still exists. And the way that campus community planning portrays it is like it's a bygone era, low density. I can show you many low dense areas on the UEL lands. So I just feel really sad about these changes that are coming. We want to advocate for the legacy of this place for future student families, and you talk about grad students and how we need to focus on them. So I'd like to know what is the plan for these spaces, and also what is the consultation process to ensure that it's transparent and democratic, and it really addresses the concerns of the stakeholders there currently.
Thanks. A great question. So it's important to understand what's actually happening right now. What's happening is that housing, which was built many years ago and which is really substandard, the environment around it is lovely. I'm not referring to that. But the housing itself in the Acadia area, which is what I assume you're talking about, is actually in very, very bad shape. There are problems with mold. There are problems with a whole series of issues that would have to be dealt with. The analysis was done very carefully many years ago. Actually, a decision about 10 years ago, long before most of us were around here, was made not to continue to invest in that housing because it was in such poor shape. So that housing has to go away. That housing is going to be torn down no matter what zoning decisions are relevant to the area. So that's the first point. So the housing itself has to be replaced. Now, it could be replaced by housing that's exactly the same as the housing that's there now, but just of a better standard. I want to question the assumption around what it means to live in a sustainable community. The density there is actually the lowest that we have on campus. On campus, I'm not talking about the UEL with, 10,000 square foot houses and that sort of thing, which has nothing to do with UBC. Misnamed, right? All of that has nothing to do with UBC. But on campus, that has the lowest density. There is a real concern about using the land of the university as effectively as possible while acknowledging the points that you make around the importance of ensuring that there is community space, access to green space. All of those things are really important. So what I imagine will happen, in the short term, people are being moved into other areas of campus which had been denominated faculty and staff housing. It's been now made into graduate student family housing, and as I mentioned, we're building out faculty and staff housing at the same time. That area will remain not used for housing for a period of time, and to get to your consultation question, there will be a full consultation process that is mandated by the land use plan for the university before anything happens on that land. And that means that there will have to be a neighborhood plan which is developed, and that neighborhood plan will have to be subject to consultation with the whole university community. I don't know when that's going to happen because I don't think that there's any expectation that the land will be reused or redeveloped in the short term.
It's already been rezoned though for market housing. It's been taken out of the academic area.
But you've got to put the whole thing in a broader context, because what's happening is that other parts of the campus have been redesignated as academic. We've just done that in the Gage South area, which is now going to provide opportunities for more student housing, including graduate student housing, which is specifically targeted on that Gage area. So over time, the goal here is to build more available space for graduate student housing and undergraduate student housing, not less. And that's part of the overall land use plan.
Other questions? If you don't mind just stepping up to the microphone there.
Hello, I'm Michael Tenzer. I work in this building. Perhaps I came in a few minutes late, so perhaps you already addressed the library system.
No, we haven't.
Okay. So a number of us in music, and I'm sure people all across campus are trying to envision our libraries 10 or 15 years hence, and to understand what kind of coordinated plans are afoot. Many people would love to keep as much access as they can to the kind of library system that we have now, where actual physical books are available to all who want them as conveniently as possible, while acknowledging that, of course, things are moving to digital formats a lot more. And I'd just like to hear you speak about that.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm specifically concerned about the music library as a branch library, which we're afraid has been targeted for some kind of extinction. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. Libraries are right now one of the real head scratchers, right, in universities. How do you create a sustainable model that really increases access, that allows collections to continue to be increased, that improves services, improves advice to students on access to online information, understands that libraries are not used in the way that they were when I was a student or even when I was a young professor. I mean, the stats are dramatic in this area, and we have to understand that our folk in the library system are really working hard to figure out, just as you say, what does this look like 10 to 15 years out? So here's something interesting to contemplate. In the whole UBC library system, 60% of the books, 60% have not had to be reshelved in 8 years. Now that's not means they haven't been taken out of the library. They haven't even been taken off a shelf and left in a carrel or put somewhere else. 60% of the books. In the music library, the circulation has decreased 58% in the last 10 years. So at the same time, students quite correctly are saying, we want more access to online. We want to have databases that we can access from home. We want to be able to work in a library in teams. So many of our projects now are not individual projects. I mean, the old notion of sitting in a library in a little carrel and doing your own thing, for most people, not all, is no longer the way they interact with the library. And the library system's trying to figure that out. And it's hard. And they're trying to figure it out in a time when the cost of materials has gone up exponentially. Now, we have a little help in the last couple of years. This is one place where the rise of the Canadian dollar has made a difference. So we're able to buy more than we were 3 or 4 years ago. And I was just talking to the provost this morning, and he was mentioning that just in the last couple of years, the UBC library system's ranking in North America has gone up quite considerably because the Canadian dollars allowed us to buy more. That's great, but it doesn't address the problem that Michael's pointing to. But the context here is one of dramatic change, one of new kinds of use, and one in which the library system is under intense pressure to make sure that it can provide services and continue to expand collections at a time when both of those things cost more money. So all around the world, literally, and certainly in North America and Europe, consolidation of libraries, consolidation of collections has been one of the things that's been undertaken. And that's happened here at UBC. So, a few years ago, the math collection and other collections were moved into Barber, for example. It looks like the goal now, and I was talking to some library people about this, the goal now is to try to create a visual arts and performing arts, creative and performing arts collection, all brought together and easily accessible. And the idea is that that would be in Irving K. Barber. And the hope then is to actually provide better services, to invest, for example, in listening stations so that people have the best digital technologies available to them so that they can listen to music more easily in the collection, and where they'll have access to all of the collection in one place. The music collection is already distributed. It's over a number of locations because it overgrew the space that was available here a number of years ago. So that's the idea. It's not perfect. No one wants to lose a library, but there's going to be, I know, a town hall here at the music building to look at all of this coming up, I think, on the 18th. So I'd encourage you to all have that conversation in more detail. But I think we have to acknowledge that it can't be simply a retention of what libraries looked like 15 years ago. That is just not going to succeed going forward because the challenges are too great and the new models are too significant. I am a library nut, let me tell you. I built a library when I was a law dean. I care deeply about libraries, and even I find that in my own research, I'm doing more and more of it from my computer at home. Well, that has implications for how libraries operate, and we've got to come to grips with it, I think. Now, one piece of good news, maybe, Michael, I know one of the things that's important is scores for music students, and I know there were particular issues around that and having access to scores. So the provost was telling me this morning that it may very well be that we can reach an agreement and some kind of sensible accommodation so that scores will still be available here, so that students who are actually in the midst of working on something and want to see whether there are different interpretations that have been printed up over the years, etc., would be available easily so that they can use them for performance preparation. So that may be one way of trying to address what is obviously a major question.
Kind of quick follow-up, just about staff.
Yes.
Because the expertise that's needed to run these different kinds of libraries is very dispersed.
That's right.
And short of negotiating with library training institutes to provide a degree of super librarian, it's kind of hard to know how these things will play out. The things that you say sound very sunny, but they do. We're going to have this more access. It's going to be, we're going to consolidate. It's going to be great. But
So the head librarian...
You have 60 seconds.
Okay, the head librarian, for example, is retiring here, and maybe that opens up, and has done a wonderful job over many, many years, but maybe that opens up different opportunities. The point you make is fundamentally the right one. It's not just investing in collections, it's investing in the people who can help us take best advantage of the collections. And that, again, is what libraries are struggling with. How do we train people so that they do have that expertise? How do we ensure that we have the resources so that we can hire the expertise? That's exactly what we need to figure out. But it can't just be by having distributed libraries all over campus that are only partially funded.
Great. Well, thank you. We have to end exactly at 1, so I want to thank all of you for coming out, for your attention, for the questions you've submitted and the questions you've asked here. I'll invite you to go to strategicplan.ubc.ca/reporting to view the full Place and Promise report. If you have a question that hasn't been answered, I'm told you can forward it to presidents.office@ubc.ca. The event was videotaped and will be on the President's website in the next year. Thank you.